Well, welcome back. Now, in terms of, shall we say, domestic politics here in the United Kingdom, it's been a veritable feeding fest over the last week or so, as I'm sure you'll be aware. And recent events vis-à-vis a certain former ambassador to Washington have brought into sharp focus things that I, and I'm willing to bet many of you, have long believed to be the case. In terms of the very unhealthy, insipid, insidious, corrupt relationship between our successive governments of whatever political stripe, and there are only ever two in this country, in England anyway, and they're, shall we call them, corporate overlords, the billionaire class, you name it, but certainly some very, very powerful people who've never been elected by anybody ever, but whose often malign intents manifest themselves in our day-to-day lives, and to our great and unnecessary cost at times. So yeah, that's the sort of general backdrop, but recent events have served only to cement that view and bring it into even sharper focus, I'm sure you'll agree. Now, so much has happened recently on the back of the disclosure of over 3 million documents, I think it is. I don't think we even need to mention the name of the person at the centre of that particular retrospective investigation, if you like, across the pond. But even though a lot of those have been redacted substantially, it's quite apparent to me that there's an awful lot still to come, because you can't just pour over the detail of 3 million documents in the space of 2 or 3 days. So I think there will be additional very embarrassing revelations in the ensuing days and weeks on the back of that particular piece of disclosure. Bearing in mind, apparently, that there's just as much still that's yet to be disclosed. So anything could happen, and in the current climate it probably will. Hey, now then, so impossible for me on one video to go through everything and what my particular thoughts on it would be. So I'm going to have to focus on one little bit at a time. Otherwise, you'll be unsubscribing in droves, and I want to keep these particular little pieces to camera relatively brief and succinct. But one thing that occurred to me watching the things that unfolded yesterday after a fairly disastrous Prime Minister's questions for the Prime Minister himself, who looked to be very much on the back foot, very insecure, very unsure of himself, very defensive. And what, to be fair, was a pretty, shall we say, competent show on behalf of the leader of the opposition, whose views I don't particularly support normally, but credit where it's due, quite incisive. And on the back of that though came a debate, really, regarded in, or rather known in parliamentary circles as a humble request, is it, or something of that nature. Now then, so it was basically a debate aimed at securing the release of all the documents pertinent to the appointment of Peter Mandelson as our ambassador to the United States last year. Now, those of you that have been following politics for a few decades in this country like me will know that the history of Peter Mandelson is punctuated with examples of falling from grace on the back of highly questionable behaviour, at very best described as a conflict of interests, and at the very worst as appearing on the face of it to be no more or less than corruption. So yeah, a debate basically to secure the release of all the documents pertinent to his appointment, i.e. the vetting procedures and the background checks and the rest of it. And clearly this has become a source of massive embarrassment to the government, who at the very top have made a catastrophic error of judgment. Who in the right mind would appoint an individual previously sacked twice for questionable behaviour from senior government posts? I have no idea at all. And of course, now that we know that this particular individual also, would you believe, encouraged via a certain now deceased prior convicted individual in the United States, tried to secure via him a piece of bullying from the head of the world's biggest bank to our Chancellor back on the back of the 2008 financial crisis, which was Alistair Darling, part of the Gordon Brown-led Labour government back then, actually encouraged that particular person to, would you believe, bully the Chancellor into shelving plans to tax bankers' bonuses. Hey, would you believe it? The very same bankers that caused the economic crash globally in the first place. So have a think about that. The people actually caused the whole show to collapse through their corrupt dealings in the first place end up lobbying the British Chancellor to shelve ideas about recovering some of the money that they'd blown for us by increasing their taxes on the bonuses, and are helped in doing that by the de facto Deputy Prime Minister of the time, Peter Mandelson. If you wrote it as a work of fiction, it would not be believed, but yet it appears it is so. Absolutely unbelievable. But the bit I wanted to touch on really was that process, that humble address or humble request, whatever it's called, exact term escapes me now, but led to the debate in Parliament, which eventually resulted, after another government U-turn, in the release, or the agreement to release, the documents pertinent to the background checks and vetting of Peter Mandelson as a candidate to be appointed as the UK ambassador to Washington, which of course he subsequently was. And I'm betting there's an awful lot in those documents that a lot of people in very high places do not want released. And I think one of the tactics, and this is the crux of what I'm getting at here, so bear with me, I think at the crux of that process is one particular tactic, which is the referral of the whole matter to the Metropolitan Police for criminal investigation. Now, what that means is, and this has come to transpire very conveniently, is of course that the Met have turned around and said, please don't release all of the documents because some of them will prejudice our inquiry. How convenient would that be? So you can see a little bit of conspiratorial thinking going on here behind the scenes. If we refer the whole lot to the Metropolitan Police for criminal investigation, they will be almost mandated to say that they do not want releasing many of these documents on the grounds that it will frustrate their inquiry, and therefore, because of these things take months, don't they, giving the government an awful lot of breathing space in which to draft a plan of action for survival. That'd be my guess. So let's have a look at the crux of what grounds the Met will base their request for restricted release of some of these documents. And my best guess is that based on legal principles, the grounds will be very much along the lines of some of the grounds that are detailed in the Police and Criminal Evidence Act of 1984, specifically regarding the rights of arrested people not to be held incommunicado. So basically what the codes of practice of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act say is, amongst other things, that where a person is arrested, that person has the right to have one other person notified of his or her arrest. And that's a general right, a general principle. There is, however, an exception, and that is where a senior officer authorises that right to be delayed on the grounds that to exercise it might result in the alerting of suspected people, the frustration of the arrest of further people, or the recovery of evidence. So you've three elements there where you can deny that fundamental right. And I'm sure you can imagine if somebody's been arrested for stealing a load of property and has been involved with 2 or 3 other people in stealing all that property, and that property's not yet been recovered, then there's a very strong argument that says if you allow that person really to have somebody notified of their arrest, then the cat's out of the bag, the outstanding property will vanish, therefore the evidence will vanish, and the accomplices will probably also vanish, because they'll know exactly what's happening in terms of an investigation taking place. So I can only imagine that the Met Police's justification for making that request about limiting the release of documents surrounding the appointment of Peter Mandelson as ambassador to the United States last year will be on the basis that to do so will frustrate their inquiries, because it might lead to the alerting of other people yet to be arrested, or might lead to the a frustration, shall we say, of attempts to recover additional evidence. And if you take those factors into consideration and draw the appropriate parallel, you can see that legally it makes a great deal of sense, except in this case I think that's a bit of hogwash. It's a bit of smoke and mirrors, because if you look at the analogy of somebody arrested for stealing a load of property and withholding their rights not to be held incommunicado for a period, then you can see the logic, because who else knows about that other than the police and the person that's been arrested? So it's not widely known about, and therefore arguments around not alerting other people hold water. Absolutely. And in my career I've signed boatloads of these authorities, signed a lot of authorities to delay a person's right to notify somebody of their arrest. They're quite common. But in a case which has such broad public exposure, not only nationally but globally, how can that argument hold true? How can you say when every man, his wife, his kids and his dog know exactly what's happened now in relation to the decision to appoint this individual? How can you argue that any document released into the public domain will frustrate the Met Police investigation on the grounds that it might alert other people or hinder the recovery of other evidence, etc., etc.? It's a nonsense. It doesn't hold true, because everybody knows. And anybody who has something to hide with regards to this whole sorry tale, if they haven't hidden it by now, then they deserve all that's coming to them, just for being a little bit stupid, really. So I don't think it particularly holds water, that argument, and my best guess is this is a proxy to allow the government to restrict the release of documents that could be very, very incriminating, or at least very, very embarrassing indeed for the Prime Minister and his close associates. Hey, and we all know who they are, don't we? So that'd be my guess. It's a theory based on experience and on applying logic from one area of the law to another. But yeah, I struggle to understand what it is that could be released that might frustrate a police investigation when everybody that might be captured by the net of that investigation already knows. Don't make a great deal of sense to me. But anyway, those are my thoughts. More as this particular story unfolds. And yeah, if you like what I do on this channel, the Bingley Batten, please would you consider subscribing. And most importantly, because videos like this where content creators are particularly critical of the establishment don't get the exposure that perhaps other material would. So the very, very best thing that you can do to help me in my endeavours on this channel is to share as widely as possible. Make sure you click a like, make sure you subscribe if you're not already, and with that, I'll see you on the next one.